VoePass Flight 2283 crashed outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we're going to talk about it. All 57 passengers and 4 crew members were killed in the accident, which happened yesterday, August 9th at 16:22 Universal Time, which is 4:22 p.m. in Greenwich, England, which is, for whatever reason, the place where the worldwide aviation clock was established. Sao Paulo is 3 hours earlier, which public math makes for 1:22 at the time of the crash. The aircraft was an ATR 72-500, which was built in Toulouse, France, not far from Big Brother Airbus Industries, which owns half of ATR. Now, the ATR 72 is a twin turboprop feeder airliner. The 72 in the name refers to the standard seating configuration of the aircraft, 72 passenger seats, although it can be configured for up to 78 people. The aircraft is a stable workhorse of the worldwide aviation fleet, though places like the US and Europe have gradually matriculated away from turboprops towards similarly sized regional jets. Sales still continue for the rest of the world. Turboprops have some advantages over jets, especially along shorter routes. The ATR fleet, which includes the Dash 72 and Dash 42 models, eclipsed 10 million flights in the year 2000 with over 4 billion miles flown. It's a well-vetted platform. The airline itself, VoePass, is the 4th largest domestic airline in Brazil, which sounds impressive until you get to the actual market share, which is 0.3%. LATAM is dominant down there, and VoePass is effectively a LATAM surrogate. So we're going to get into the crash here, and there are a few things that you need to know right off the bat. There are reports that there was a severe ice warning between 12,000 and 21,000 feet. The aircraft was at 17,000 feet just prior to the point where the aircraft lost control. That was also the cruising altitude for the flight. There's already speculation that icing may have been a factor, which makes sense. Severe icing, if encountered, substantially disrupts the aerodynamic capabilities of an aircraft. Bystander videos on the ground depicted the aircraft in a flat spin just prior to impact. Now, flat spins in commercial aircraft are nearly unheard of. To explain why, I've got to do a quick shotgun on the aerodynamics of stalls and spins. For those of you who know quite a bit about aviation, this is going to be a rudimentary refresher. For those who don't, it's going to be a fire hose. The simplest explanation for how an aircraft flies is that the wings fling a mass of air downwards that counterbalances the force of gravity. Newton's laws state that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. If you're in a 50,000-pound aircraft flinging 50,000 pounds of air downwards, you're going to float in the current. Now, wings do this by 2 methods. The more efficient way is through the curvature at the top of the wing. Air passes by the aircraft at whatever speed the aircraft is traveling at, and at approximately the same speed across the bottom of the flat wing surface. The air that travels along the curved upper portion of the wing has to travel a further distance than the air along that flat bottom. This means that the upper boundary air has to travel faster, which decreases pressure above the wing. Low pressure on top, high pressure on bottom, lifts the aircraft. The less efficient way of producing lift is to increase the angle of attack of the wing versus the airflow. This is effectively what you're doing if you stick your hand out of the window of your car and fly it. It effectively does the same thing as the curvature of the wing in that it produces lift, but it also produces quite a bit more drag in the process. There's a point in increasing angle of attack where you aggressively transition from producing lift to producing drag. This is what we call a stall. More precisely, a stall represents a precipitous decrease in lift with an increase in the angle of attack. This gets a little bit confusing because you'll often hear pilots talking about stall speed. Indeed, regulators require manufacturers to publish stall as a speed, but it's not actually a speed, it's an angle of attack. We use speed for simplicity's sake. Stall speed is a speed at a given weight, generally the maximum weight that the aircraft is certified to fly, where a particular type of aircraft will stall under a load of 1 G. In the real world, aircraft rarely maintain 1 G. In a level turn, you're around 1.2 Gs. Bump through a bit of bad turbulence and you'll fluctuate between a half a G and 1.5 Gs. If you were to graph the actual stall speed during a given flight, the line that you would get would be chaotically erratic. If this sounds a bit confounding to you, good. You understand the dilemma that pilots face every day. Physics in the real world confound all the best efforts of the engineers with their slide rules. Now, an aircraft stalls when the angle of attack of the wing exceeds a certain value. In a straight-wing aircraft like the ATR 72, this occurs at roughly 17 degrees. Prior to this, lift increases with an increase in angle of attack. After this, lift precipitously drops, which generally means that the aircraft can't maintain altitude anymore. As the airflow separates from the engineered surface on the top of the wing, it becomes turbulent. This produces a chaotic series of aerodynamic forces on the aircraft, which can result in a sort of wobbling trajectory through the air. Compounding this, at slower speeds, the control surfaces, which allow the pilot to control the aircraft, become less effective. There is a certain point at which the chaotic aerodynamic stall forces can overcome the control authority of the control surfaces, which are the ailerons, rudder, and elevator. An unintentional spin represents an extremely dangerous condition. It's caused when a fully stalled aircraft begins to yaw. Yaw is undesirable in commercial aviation, and that's where the vertical stabilizer and the rudder come in. The vertical stabilizer is a big thing at the tail of the aircraft. The rudder is a small movable surface on the aft portion of the vertical stabilizer. Both of these surfaces are designed to contain yaw. Now, if you have yaw during a fully developed stall, it'll turn into a spin where one wing is producing more lift and drag than the other wing. This has to do with one wing moving forward in the slipstream while the other is moving backwards. In most cases, this results in an uncontrollable roll. And this is where we get into aircraft weight and balance. The goal for transport aircraft is to balance the need of efficiency and performance against the need for stability. Stability in the pitch axis is influenced significantly by the center of gravity of the aircraft, which is an imaginary point where the aircraft would balance if you set it on top of a pin. You increase stability in an aircraft by placing the center of gravity in front of the center of lift. This means that, all things being equal, the aircraft nose wants to drop. This nose-down tendency is countered by trim in the elevator or vertical stabilizer. The trim required to keep the nose level adds aerodynamic weight to the aircraft, which decreases top speed and increases fuel burn per mile traveled. But the trim effects that this nose-down tendency generates increases stability, which is the natural inclination of the aircraft to return to what we call the trimmed airspeed. So if the aircraft slows down, the elevator down trim force decreases, the nose drops, you lose altitude, you gain airspeed, and you return to the original trimmed airspeed. This works for speeding up too, where the nose rises and the speed decreases. In a normal spin, as the wings rotate in a roll, the nose will inevitably drop due to the forward center of gravity. If, however, the aircraft has a completely balanced center of gravity, which would represent a center of gravity aft of the allowable limits for a transport category aircraft, the drag differential between one wing and the other can result in a flat spin where the pitch attitude of the aircraft remains relatively flat while the nose and tail yaw around a point. Because there's very little airflow over the control surfaces in a flat spin, there's little that pilots can do to recover from one, particularly in a transport category aircraft which is not designed for spins in the first place. Now, the type of spin here may be incidental. Although there's an almost zero chance that a pilot could recover a transport category aircraft from a flat spin, the odds of recovering from a traditional nose-down spin really aren't that much better. Twin-engine aircraft, particularly big twin-engine aircraft, which the ATR 72 is, are not designed or tested for spin recoveries. Though certified pilots in these aircraft practice recovering from stalls, they don't practice recovering from a spin. And even if they wanted to try it out in a simulator, simulators don't have the flight test data available to accurately depict a spin. And even if they did have that flight test data, the airframe would likely break apart anyways. The net of this is that the aircraft almost definitely had an aft center of gravity. Most likely it was effectively aft of the center of gravity limit for the ATR 72. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the airline did anything wrong. Center of gravity calculation for nearly all airlines are approximations. You take an average weight for a person and their baggage. You assume that the people on board are going to stay in whatever seat that you put them in the first place. and you have a calculation that more or less represents reality. Safety margins are built into the process to limit the odds of an out of CG condition, but every great once in a while it's going to happen. Unless something extraordinary happens along with it, the aircraft will remain flyable, if not a little less stable, and a little more of a handful for the pilots. More interesting here is the telemetry for the crash. There's a very weird ground speed tracing for the accident flight that's represented on Flight Radar 24, but I think this has to do with the Dash 500 variant of the ATR 72 not transmitting GPS-derived data over ADS-B. I believe that Flight Radar calculates the ground speed from the change in the position that is reported by the aircraft, so I think it's a red herring. You can see that the true airspeed, which appears to have been transmitted directly from the aircraft avionics system, is much more stable in this particular case. There is an interesting thing to note here. 2 minutes prior to the aircraft entering a very steep descent from the cruise altitude of 17,000 feet, the true airspeed data returns NA. It's possible that this indicates that the avionics system no longer viewed the airspeed data from the barometric system as being reliable. Now this goes back to the severe ice warning that I talked about earlier. There are 4 levels of icing that a pilot can encounter in flight: trace, light, moderate, and severe. Just about all transport category aircraft have ice protection systems that are certified only for light icing conditions. Anything greater than that will result in accumulation of ice on the aircraft to the point that it eventually becomes objectionable. By objectionable, I mean that it noticeably affects aircraft performance and stall characteristics, which includes decreasing the angle of attack that an aircraft will stall at. But that's just the wing. Icing can also affect other components, notably the airspeed indicator. Quickly, for those of you who don't know, airspeed is measured by pitot tubes and static ports. Pitot tubes stick out into the airstream and measure the pressure of air hitting the probe. Static ports measure the ambient air pressure, which decreases with altitude and temperature. Airspeed indicators are calibrated gauges that depict the difference between static pressure and pitot pressure. These gauges are typically heated by electronic elements to prevent ice from blocking the ports and giving pilots bad information. Airliners generally have a minimum of 3 separate pitot static ports, which feeds information to the captain and first officer's instruments, as well as the standby instrument. Avionics systems will flag the information as unreliable if there is an excessive deviation between the captain and first officer's indications, generally a difference of more than 5 knots. In severe icing conditions, ice accumulations can exceed the capabilities of the heating element to shed the ice that's forming on the probe. This occurred in Air France Flight 447, which was flying from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to Paris, France. The flight encountered icing conditions en route which blocked the pitot system. The airspeed indicators began depicting erroneous information. The pilots became confused. They stalled the aircraft and descended from 35,000 feet to impact the Atlantic without ever recovering. Given the fact that the ATR in this case was in cruise and about to descend, it seems unlikely that the aircrew simply let the aircraft get slow. You generally don't slow down for a descent. If they were getting erroneous airspeed indications, accentuated by the performance-degrading elements that icing creates on an airframe, it becomes much easier to understand how they got themselves into the predicament. Once investigators get the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder processed, they'll have much better information about what actually occurred. For now, it looks like a severe ice encounter resulting in unreliable airspeed indications that ultimately resulted in a stall spin with an aft center of gravity contributing to the unrecoverable flat spin that developed. This obviously represents a great tragedy, a number of people simultaneously perishing while they're just trying to travel from one place to the other. God bless them.